Hi students, welcome to the BYJU'S Hindu News Analysis for 7th of December 2018. So let's get started. So let's look into the first article. The first article says Cabinet clears policy to double agri exports. So what is the context here? So the context here clearly says that the Union Cabinet approved the agriculture export policy that is aimed at increasing India's exports to 60 billion by 2022 from the current 37 billion. So what the cabinet has decided is that it is going to provide a boost to the agriculture export. And how is it doing? Basically what it intends to do is it has provided a policy framework to make sure there is increase in the export of the agricultural commodities like the tea, the coffee as well as the rice, so that there is increase in the country's share in the global agricultural trade. So the policy here basically wants to bring about a structural change. And what are these structural changes? It's focusing on basically bringing about a rejuvenation in the infrastructure program. So it wants to modernize the infrastructure program, standardize the products so that any abysmal or lower product will completely taken out and higher quality products will be exported to another country. So there will be streamlining of regulations. So what this will basically means is you will not have any ad hoc process. What you will have is an institutional mechanism, and it is this institutional mechanism which will make sure that the products and the agricultural commodities are exported on a given period and a particular time. And what we will also have is the decision making skills will be provided to all these institutions, so that it is not on a ad hoc basis, but instead there is a long term perspective of increasing the livelihood measure for the farmer. And that apart, what we will also have is the R&D activities, so that there is boost in the agriculture exports that we see through this agriculture export policy. So this article further goes on to say the objectives of the policy are, apart from doubling farmers' income, to diversify the export basket and destinations, to boost high value and value added exports with a focus on the perishables. So what this means is, currently when you look into the current context, you have Indian exports that are there with respect to few countries. Let's take for example the United States of America or the European countries, and few of the exports to Chinese as well. But what you will see with this agriculture export policy is there would be diversification. So you would have all those vacuum areas that are currently there getting filled up. So you will have a major expansion. So Indian agricultural products will be delivered to South American countries, the Asian countries which we are currently in process of talking through the RCEP. So there is spread of the agricultural projects that is there from the current region to the future exploration. And what will be the focus is on the perishables. Let's take for example the fruits. Let's take the example of the vegetables. These are perishables. This will have a very low number of days where you can have the food for. So what you will focus on is how is that the export of the perishables can be taken place with respect to this agricultural policy. So this policy also aims to promote export of novel, indigenous, organic, ethnic, traditional and non-traditional products, according to a press release. So it further goes on to say the objective also is to provide an institutional mechanism for market access, tackling the barriers and dealing with sanitary and phytosanitary issues. So what this basically means is there are number of barriers that any other country can come up with. For example, the tax barriers as well as the non-tax barriers. So the tax barriers would for the agricultural products may be sudden hike in the taxation. So what India will make sure is how is that we would be able to reduce the tax barrier on one side. On the other side, you also have the non-tax barrier. So what are the non-tax barriers? It includes the sanitary and the phytosanitary issues. Let's take for example the food safety and the animal and the plant health standards. So what India is looking at currently is how is that we would be able to step aside these tax barriers as well as the non-tax barriers in the form of sanitary and the phytosanitary issues. So anything which is stopping Indian agricultural products will be looked into, and all these barriers with the future time will be completely reduced. And it further goes on to say in order to do this, the center will work with the state governments to create clusters that can focus on particular crops. Let's take for example, there are state specific crops that are grown. You have the Darjeeling tea, you have coffee that is being produced in Karnataka. So what the state government and the central government will do is they'll get into an agreement so that these type of products have a much better quality and standard. So they'll have a cluster or a small regional based approach so that there is maximum extraction from this particular region and the same happens to be exported to another country. So what this basically means is all those loopholes, all those drawbacks that were earlier seen with respect to the agriculture export will be currently looked into, and these things will be reworked in such a way that R&D, infrastructure and many other reforms will be initiated so that we would be able to make India an export economy which will be reaching up to 60 billion by the year 2022. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says tourists bring a wave of trash into the beaches. So what is this article all about? So this article is speaking in reference to the beach pollution. So what is the context? So there was one of the study that was conducted by the National Center of Coastal Research. So according to this study, what it says is apart from the air pollution, apart from the water pollution, what you will see is increase in the beach pollution, all due to the number of tourists flocking up to these coastal cities. So because there is tourism spread that is happening in and around India in the coastal cities, the tourists coming up to these coastal cities are increasing the beach pollution is what this particular study has gone on to say. So first point that we have to understand is what is this National Center of Coastal Research? Why? Because this can be a prospective question in your prelims examination. So this National Center for Coastal Research comes under the administration of the Ministry of Earth Sciences. So what is the work of this National Center for Coastal Research? So basically what it will do is it will have its certain tools, it will have its own techniques. So basically it will address all the erosion as well as the economic system damages, monitor the level of marine pollutants in the seas around the Indian coastal belt. So basically what this National Center of Coastal Research does is it monitors and predicts the health of the estuarine as well as the coastal water, keeps up with the water quality criteria, and also looks into how the ecosystem of the coastal water is. In case there is a breach, in case there is more of marine pollution, this will monitor this particular pollutant in the seas around the India. So this is the job of National Center of Coastal Research. So what this article goes on to say is it gives us certain statistics. So what it says is that the NCCR conducted a qualitative analysis and it found that plastic litter from tourism alone accounted for 40 to 60% of the beach litter. So it has said that because of all these tourists who are flocking this particular region have actually littered this particular region by throwing the plastic bottles, the cutlery as well as the thermocol, and because of all these deposition, what you will see is there is large scale marine pollution, or what is also called as the beach pollution. Further, what it also goes on to say is after tourism, fishing was the next biggest source of litter. As we have previously discussed, there are something called as ghost nets, or what we see in this case is the fishing nets. These nets that are used by the fishermen are completely chucked into the water, which can also act as the pollution. And further on it goes on to say that the proportion of biomedical litter was also high in urban areas, and all this was in the form of medical waste that were being dumped across this ocean region. So in order to overcome this issue, what we need is certain mechanisms, we need certain programs. So what are the recommendations? So when we look into the recommendations, what we have to understand is certain experts have given and voiced their opinion, and one of the most important point that we have to understand is that India currently needs a national marine litter policy to basically control and manage the waste on the land as well as prevent this particular entry of plastic bottles into the marine environment. So the first key important point is the government needs to come up with the national marine litter policy. Few experts also say that there needs to be installation of the debris broom as well as the fin defectors. So what are these debris brooms? Basically, they are nothing but the barrier controls that can be used in the coastal water ecosystem that can contain or deflect or exclude certain floating debris that happens in the marine ecosystem. So basically what you will have is certain barriers that will be put across the oceans such that this will actually not let the debris pass out this particular region. So the debris can be collected out of this region and decomposed in a different area. And the third important point that experts have flagged is what India can also do is India can start blue flagging its beaches. So what is this blue flagging certification? So this is also a prospective question that can be expected in your prelims examination. So what is this blue flagging? It is one of the certifications that is provided by Foundation for the Environmental Education, which is a non-governmental organization. This non-governmental organization provides certain stringent certification rules. Let's take for example the educational, the safety rules, accessibility criteria. In case a particular nation is able to meet up all these standards that have been designed by the Foundation for Environmental Education, then such beach will be falling under this particular certification. So Chandrabhaga beach on the Konark city of Odisha will be the first in Asia to get the blue flag certification. So as we have discussed, this blue flagging basically will have certain stringent rules. Let's take for example the beach areas will be maintained cleanly and you will have all the waste disposal bins, you will have adequate recycling facilities. What you will also have is a safe access around this particular beach, which will be constantly patrolled in order to make sure there is safety as well as enforcement of the rules. And further, what you will also see is unauthorized camping, driving or dumping in and around this particular area will be completely stopped. And what you will have is a particular map which will be designed in such a way that all the people who are coming up in here will have to follow these stringent rules, or else these people would be penalized for their actions in this particular region. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says Karnataka must set aside 500 crore for Bengaluru Lakes. So even before we understand what this article is all about, let me give you a brief background. We have discussed this earlier, but let me give you a brief background so that we would be able to understand this much better. So this Bengaluru Lake, which is in Bangalore, is known for its froth as well as catching up of fire, which was the international as well as the national headlines news. This froth that you see in the picture is due to the industrial activity, industrial waste that is dumped, and you also have the untreated sewage that is also dumped across this lake. And what you will further see is that there is catching up of fire in this lake. And why does this happen? So you see all these apartments in and around this particular lake which has oil from the household mixing up with the rainwater, and there is chemical reaction that happens with the untreated oil that is dumped across this lake, and the chemical reaction makes sure that the lake catches up fire. So due to this particular accommodation of froth as well as the oil mixing up with rainwater catching up fire, what you will see is this has caused a lot of inconvenience to this particular region. So when you look into the 1960s and the 70s, the water in this lake was used for agricultural irrigation. This particular lake was known for its livelihood support for all the fishing communities, and there was one of the boat festivals which was also called as the Tepochava. And currently what you see is that this particular lake is completely disturbed, and because of its disturbance this has caused a major disruption to the ecosystem. So you have the region in and around that lake where the groundwater has completely polluted, and what you will also see is the fishing, which was once the livelihood of the people in and around this particular region, have also lost their livelihood. So on one side you have this groundwater pollution, you have the fishing livelihood means that is completely dismantled, and the froth that is coming out of this river, when it touches the skin of a particular person, what it will further cause is the irrigation. And why is this happening? It is due to multiple institutions taking care of this lake. So you have the BWSSB and the BDA which are not taking complete responsibility of this lake. When it comes to the BDA, it has the sole responsibility of taking all the properties of the bank Bangalore, and then you also have the BWSSB, which is basically looking into the sewage. So what the BDA complains in this particular case is, we are ready to take care of this particular lake region, but the problem is, without sewage authorities taking the precedence, we would not be able to take it up. Why? Because even if we clean up this mess that is happening in this region, the untreated sewage which gets dumped into this river can again increase this particular on a manifold level. So it puts all the blame on the BWSSB, which is supposed to take care of the sewage treatment plants in Bangalore, and at the same time the BDA is also itself responsible for this program. Why? Because previously the government had given enough funding, and the funding was to make sure that there is enough fencing around this particular region. But what you see in this particular area is that there is encroachment of the property by the real estate mafia, and the sole responsibility of taking care of this was the BDA, but the BDA did not do the funding. And the third important reason is the people themselves. Ideally what they should have done is, they should not have dumped the oil into this lake, but what they have done, they have dumped the oil into this lake, and what you will see is a catching up of fire. So because there is high scale of pollution, not a single authority, and encroachment, the state government previously, the NJT, had come up with certain rules, but these rules that were laid by the NJT was not implemented or practiced. So as a result of this, what the NJT says is, in order to protect and rejuvenate Bengaluru's Bengaluru, Agara as well as Vartur lakes, the National Green Tribunal directed the state government to transfer 500 crore to an escrow account. So what it has further directed is, the state government needs to deposit 50 crore to the Central Pollution Control Board as environmental composition, and it further goes on to say, this implementation process will be headed by a panel headed by Supreme Court Judge Santosh Hegde and comprising representatives from CPCB, the State Pollution Control Board, as well as Ramachandra, who is from the Indian Institute of Science, who would monitor the implementation as to how lake can be rejuvenated. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says, air pollution cause of 1 in 8 deaths. So what is the context here? So there was one of the study that was taken up and published by the India State Level Disease Burden Initiative, which is a venture of the Indian Council of Medical Research, the Public Health Foundation for India, and the Institute for Health Metrics as well as Evaluation, in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, along with experts and stakeholders associated with more than 100 Indian institutions. So after this particular study was conducted, they have come up with certain extracts, and what we will have to look at is certain statistics. India, with about 18% of the world's population, has a disproportionately high 26% of the global premature deaths and disease burden due to air pollution. It further goes on to say that it has reported about 12.4 lakh deaths in India in 2017 due to air pollution, which included 6.7 lakh deaths due to outdoor particulate matter as well as 4.8 lakhs due to household air pollution. And as we always have seen, that Delhi, which is also known as the pollution capital, has the highest PM 2.5 exposure, and this is followed by North Indian states of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar as well as Haryana. And what it further goes on to say is that this study says that the disability adjusted life years attributed to air pollution in India for major non-communicable diseases were at least as high as attributed to tobacco use. So what is this disability adjusted life year? So this basically means it is that number of years that an individual would lose if he is suffering from a particular ill health. So what the article says in reference to the disability adjusted life years is that the estimated increase in the life expectancy of Indians, if the pollution levels had been within the safe limit, was about 1.7 years. So this tool of disability adjusted life years was developed in the year 1990 so that we could be able to compare the overall health as well as the life expectancy of different countries. So what we have to understand in current context is that pollution, which is increasing large scale in India due to use of thermal power, due to use of carbon fuels, is actually causing a large scale health impact, and this is what this article goes on to speak about. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says deaths in accidents due to potholes are unacceptable, says the Supreme Court. So what is the context? So there was one of the committees that was appointed by the Supreme Court, and that was headed by the former Supreme Court judge, and that is Justice K.S. Radhakrishnan. So kindly remember, the Radhakrishnan committee was looking into the road accidents. This can be a prospective question in your prelims examination. So as they delved deep into this particular issue, what they got to know was that there were about 14,926 persons who died in road accidents due to potholes from 2013 to 2017 across the country. So in reference to these accidents because of the potholes, what the Supreme Court has done is it has given a scathing criticism to the government. So it has questioned the authorities, it has questioned the authorities of the municipal authorities. So it has asked all the municipal authorities, what have you been doing? What is your responsibility? Where have you given up your responsibility? It is your ultimate responsibility to make sure that all these potholes are covered up, but you are not responsible enough to make sure that these potholes are completely cemented. But because of your lethargic attitude, because of your attitude of negligence, what has happened is that there are about 15,000 people who have lost their lives, and what it has said is that the number of people who have lost their lives are probably more than on the border as well as those killed by the terrorists. These are the harsh words that has been used by the Supreme Court against the working of the municipal authorities, the state government as well as the central government. So when you look into the evidences, what it says is that Uttar Pradesh has about 4,415 people who have passed away, followed by Maharashtra as well as Madhya Pradesh, which are the three states with the top death rates. So this committee headed by K.S. Radhakrishnan has further gone on to say that overspeeding along with driving on the wrong side was the single biggest reason for accidents. It further went on to say that there are grave violations that have been happening from the user end as well, that is in the form of drunk driving, red light jumping, use of mobile phones, which has also been a threat in losing the lives of the people. So as a result of this, what the government should be doing is it has recommended that they should be giving a compensation of about 5 lakh as a compensation to be paid to the kin, is what the Radhakrishnan committee has gone on to say. But then it has further asked the center to file its response on the committee's report after consenting all the states. So we will be taking up this article in the future as well, but as of now this is what we need to understand. So let's look into the next article. So the next article says asymmetric warfare. So this asymmetric warfare is also called as the asymmetric engagement. This refers to a form of unconventional warfare where there is a significant difference in the powers of the warring sides. So what does it mean? So you have two types of entities which are going on to a war. One which has a superior force, superior equipment. On the other side you have another group which are not having that much of equipment, which do not have the number of people that is required to go on war, and that is what it means by asymmetric warfare. The term is generally used to refer to conflicts between the armed forces of a larger nations and significantly smaller insurgent groups that possess relatively little firepower. So insurgent groups which cannot match the power of a larger armies generally try to employ guerrilla tactics to frustrate and cause significant damage to their adversaries rather than to completely eliminate them. And this term was coined by Andrew J.R. Mack in his 1975 article Why Big Nations Lose Small War. So what is asymmetric warfare in the Indian context? So this asymmetric warfare in the Indian context can be directly linked to the Naxalism movement. So what it basically means is you have a relatively small and lightly equipped force attacks, which is the Naxalites, attacking the weakness of a stronger opponent, that is in the form of the police personnel as well as the CRPF, by unorthodox means, which basically involves the guerrilla tactics. So these police personnel as well as the CRPF have no no idea about the forest areas. So what the Naxalites do here is they employ their guerrilla tactics in order to butcher the police personnel. And what do they do? How do they make utilize of all this? They use human bombs against the important personalities. They use petrol bombs against the tanks, or in general context you can also have the civil aircraft against the skyscrapers, as that happened in the 9/11. Then we had recently discussed about the improvised explosive devices which can be used against the vehicles as well as the military convoys. You can have indiscriminate shooting of the people, that is the tribal belt that we are speaking about. Or what you will also see is crude bombs that are employed on the railway tracks. And what you will see is that all this are used by the Naxalites in order to fight a superior force, and that superior force and this minimal force is what means by unconventional warfare. So what are the examples that we can take up? We can take up the general examples of Naxalism, or the 26/11 attack on Mumbai, or we can also say the Parliament attack in 2001, the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center. So all these examples help us get to a conclusion that they are not able to fight a superior army or the superior personnel, but instead what they can do is hurt them and make sure that their agenda is met. So this is what we need to understand in reference to the asymmetric warfare. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says Supreme Court upholds induction of 3 Pondi MLAs. So first thing that we have to understand here is about the Puducherry Legislative Assembly. So the Puducherry Assembly has the unicameral legislature which comprises of 4 districts. Basically you have the Puducherry, you have the Karaikal, the Mahe as well as Yanam. And the most important point is we need to understand that there are 30 seats for the Puducherry Assembly, and there are 3 other seats which can be nominated by the central government. And this particular nomination of 3 MLAs by the central government is given in one of the laws that is present in the Union Territories Act of 1963. So this law, Union Territories Act of 1963, under section 3 of 3 clearly goes on to explain that the central government may nominate not more than 3 persons not being in service in the government to be the members of the Legislative Assembly of the Union Territories. So under this particular section 3 of 3, under the Union Territories Act of 1963, the central government goes on to appoint 3 nominated MLAs. And who are these? It is V. Swaminathan, K.G. Shankar as well as Selanganapati as MLAs of the Union Territory of Puducherry. However, what you will see is that the Speaker of the Puducherry Legislative Assembly barred these 3 members from being recognized as MLAs. Why? Because the Speaker completely felt that this violated the principles of federalism. How? Because in the previous precedents, what you will see is that the central government actually consulted the electorate government of the Union Territory, and that was not happening in this particular case. So on one side you are violating the principles of federalism, and you are also violating the past precedents where the central government did consult the state government. Both these were not done. That is why the Speaker felt that it did not meet the objectives of the Constitution, and he goes on to disqualify all these 3 nominated members that were appointed by the central government under the BJP administration. So aggrieved by this type of communication, these 3 members challenged the decision against this particular speaker's fold in the Madras High Court, and the Madras High Court upheld the decision of the central government that it felt that the central government has all the powers to appoint the 3 nominated members according to the Union Territories Act of 1963. But this particular judgment again goes up to the Supreme Court, and that is what the present context says. So the Supreme Court on Thursday upheld the induction of the 3 Bharatiya Janata Party members. So the Supreme Court heard the arguments of the Attorney General, that is K.K. Venugopal, who went on to say that Puducherry is a union territory and it is the property of the union government, and there is no need to consult the local government on the nominations. So what the Attorney General has gone on to say is, according to Article 239 of the Indian Constitution, the President administers a union territory through an administrator in the form of Lieutenant Governor. Neither the Constitution nor nor the Union Territories Act of 1963 has given any such clause where the central government will have to ask or consult the state government. So nowhere does the constitution or nowhere does the Union Territories Act of 1963 has mentioned this clause that the central government needs to ask the state government or the elected government. So because there is no clause, the central government has every power to nominate 3 people is what the Attorney General went on to say. In line with this, the Supreme Court has gone on to accept that the center is empowered to nominate members to the Legislative Assembly, and the Supreme Court further gone on to say that these nominated members have every right to vote on all questions, including that with respect to the budget as well as the no confidence against the government. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says extinction warning for Australia's red kangaroo. So what is it? A truffle eating Australian marsupial known as the red kangaroo has suffered a dramatic population decline and could become extinct without urgent action to save the species. So the World Wildlife Fund has said only 2 populations of the northern beetang remained in the wet coastal tropics of the northern Queensland, numbering at about 2,500 individuals, down by 70% in the past 70 years. So what the Wildlife Fund has gone on to say is that this particular species plays a unique role in maintaining ecological function in the vegetation. So if we happen to go on to lose, what we will see is an ecological collapse in this particular region. So what are the threats that are seen with respect to the red kangaroo? So when we look into what these threats that are emanating for these red kangaroos, what you will see is there are something called as feral cats which prey on these, and then there is land clearing, and there are wildfires that are catching up in Australia. So all this added with the climate change has become a major threat to the red kangaroo. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So let's look into some of the prelims practice question. It says Qatar has land boundaries with which of the following countries? Saudi Arabia, UAE as well as Bahrain, and the answer for this is one only. Let's look into the map for the same. So this question currently asks only for the land boundaries, so it has to be Saudi Arabia. If it has asked for general boundaries, you could have also said Bahrain in this particular example. So moving on, let's look into the next question. It says M13 bacteriophage recently seen in news is a virus. So this is from today's newspaper, which says virus used to speed up computers. So it says scientists have successfully used a virus to engineer a better type of memory in the computers. Let's look into the next question. It says the Chakravyuha challenge explains about the NPA issue and its impact on banking system, the issue of exit from the market. So the answer for this is 2 only, because the Chakravyuha challenge speaks about the issue of exit from the market as explained in the economic survey. So let's look into the mains practice question. What is asymmetric warfare in the Indian context? What are the measures taken by the government to suppress or reform them? So please write your answer on the comment section. We will not be giving the answer for today, so that we can actually discuss this day after tomorrow. Why? Because we want to encourage you guys to write more and more, so that there is more peer review, so that there is also evaluation from the BYJU'S team as well. So put up your answer on the comment section. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.